The city rose like a promise and a warning at the same time. Tall glass towers caught the sun and threw it back into the sky, while below them old shrines sat quietly, their stones dark with age and prayer. Roads curved around sacred trees instead of cutting them down. Drums from distant ceremonies sometimes echoed between office buildings, reminding everyone that this land had a memory. Progress walked fast here, but ancestry never moved aside. They stood together, watching each other in silence. In this place, cloth was never just cloth. It spoke before mouths did. The patterns told stories of births and funerals, of wars survived and harvests celebrated. A woman's wrap carried her mother's hopes. A man's robe held his father's courage. Elders said fabric remembered every hand that touched it. When people dressed, they were not covering their bodies, they were carrying their past. Every stitch was a word. Every color was a voice from long ago. The elders often gathered near the oldest loom in the city, its wood smooth from centuries of use. One of them would always say, "The loom does not lie." Children learned early that cloth rewarded humble hands and punished greedy ones. Those who wove with respect were blessed with steady work and peaceful sleep. Those who wove with pride found their threads breaking at the worst time. This law was not written on paper. It lived in experience, passed from mouth to ear, generation after generation. Far from the shining towers, in a village where dust clung to bare feet, Alma Zawadi was born. Her home was small, but patience lived there. Dreams were not shouted, they were whispered while working. Alma learned to sit for hours, watching, listening. She grew up knowing that good things came slowly. When others ran, she stayed. When others rushed, she waited. Even as a child, her fingers moved with care, as if they already knew what they were meant to do. Her grandmother was the keeper of the threads. Her hands were old, but they were steady. At night, by firelight, she would guide Alma's fingers across the loom. "Not all patterns are for the eyes," she warned softly. "Some are for the soul." She showed her symbols that were never spoken aloud, shapes tied to ancestors and oaths. "This gift will lift you," the old woman said, pressing Alma's hands together, "but only if you remember where it came from." Alma nodded, not knowing how heavy those words would one day become. Alma's hands carried her far beyond the red soil of her village. What began on a quiet loom under a mango tree slowly found its way into markets, then into cities, and finally across oceans. Traders spoke her name before they met her. Designers paused when they saw her cloth, touching it as if it could speak. On distant runways, lights shone bright, yet the patterns told stories of home, of rivers, ancestors, and patience. Each step she took forward carried the echo of her village behind her. Soon, people no longer spoke of Alma as a woman alone. They gave her a name that felt heavier than gold. The Golden Weaver, they called her. Some said her hands were guided by spirits. Others whispered that the ancestors themselves bent over her loom at night. "No ordinary person weaves like this," a critic once said. Alma smiled when she heard these words, though something inside her stirred. Praise is sweet, but it asks for silence in return. As her fame grew, her visits home grew fewer. Ritual days passed without her presence. Elders waited by the shrine, then went home quietly when she did not come. "She is busy," Alma would say to herself. "The world is watching." Slowly, applause began to sound louder than drums. The loom still worked, but the prayers before weaving were rushed, sometimes forgotten. In the same household where Alma once shared food and laughter, another heart watched her rise. This relative had admired her since childhood, clapping first when Alma succeeded. But admiration can grow tired when it is never returned. Each headline felt like a reminder of what had been left behind. "We started together," the relative whispered one night, bitterness creeping in. "Why does only her name travel?" The elders noticed the change long before the crowd did. They sat in circles, speaking softly. "A tree that forgets its roots will fall," one elder said. They sent messages, but received none. Alma was moving fast, and wisdom moves slowly. Then the loom began to misbehave. Threads snapped without reason. Patterns Alma knew by heart refused to settle. At night, she dreamed of cloth tearing in her hands, of her grandmother's eyes filled with sorrow. She woke unsettled, but brushed it aside. "It is only tiredness," she said. Celebrations followed her wherever she went. Music, laughter, flashing lights. Yet behind every cheer stood a shadow of doubt. Even as Amma lifted her head in triumph, the ground beneath her felt less steady, as if something unseen was shifting, waiting to be noticed. The world began to call Amma in many voices. Bright halls echoed her name. Foreign tongues praised her hands and spoke of markets without borders. Contracts arrived wrapped in fine paper, heavier than any basket she had ever carried from the village. Each promise glittered like gold. When elders sent messages, they arrived quietly, easy to set aside. "This is my moment," Amma told herself as applause rose around her. The drums of home sounded faint now, distant under the roar of the world. Men and women from faraway places sat across wide tables and pointed at her cloth. "This pattern will sell," one said. "This symbol can be simplified," another added. They spoke of numbers, not stories. Amma listened. She knew these designs once carried prayers and names of the dead, but she also knew the power these people held. Slowly, she nodded. Sacred cloth became a brand. Meaning thinned, but profit grew. The ancestors were not invited into these rooms. One evening, a document was placed before her. It spoke of ownership, protection, and rights. Amma hesitated, her grandmother's voice whispering in her memory. But the room was full, and the eyes were waiting. She signed. Ancient symbols were claimed as property. Old patterns were altered to fit foreign tastes. Somewhere, a loom went silent. Tradition does not shout when it is broken, it withdraws. The elders did not remain silent. They called Amma home. When she came, they sat in a half-circle, their faces heavy with worry. An old woman leaned on her staff and spoke, "Some cloths are not meant for sale. They are meant for balance." Another elder added, "When you sell memory, you invite forgetting." Amma bowed her head, but her heart was divided. "I hear you," she said softly, though her feet were already turning back toward the world. In the shadow of her success, a relative watched. The same hands that once helped carry water now folded in silence. Each new praise Amma received felt like a door closing. "She does not see me any more," the relative thought. At first there was pride. Then came questions. Then came pain. When no thanks came, admiration slowly hardened. Bitterness does not arrive suddenly. It grows like a weed, quiet and patient. Each celebration Amma attended without looking back watered it. "I stood with her when no one knew her name," the relative whispered in the dark. Love, left unseen, began to ache. And in that ache, something dangerous started to take root. The relative watched from the shadowed corner of the workshop, hands clenched around the edge of the worn wooden bench. "She took what should have been mine," the voice inside whispered, though no one heard. Each new exhibition, each applause-filled hall, felt like a door closing on a life that had once hoped alongside Amma. Every headline that praised her name was a reminder that destiny, in their eyes, had been stolen, not earned. Nights grew heavy, filled with unspoken questions. Why her? Why not me? Under the soft glow of firelight, secrets began to move. Whispers curled along the walls of the village huts. Promises broken, trust traded, knowledge shared in shadowed rooms where no one else could hear. "If Amma will not remember where she comes from," one said softly, "then we will remind her, piece by piece." They spoke of symbols that were never meant for profit, of rituals that bound hearts and hands alike, and of vows made in the name of ancestors. Every word was a spark, careful and quiet, carrying weight no one could yet measure. Sacred patterns, once protected by generations, now crossed invisible lines. Ancestral designs were sketched onto contracts, altered for foreign eyes. The stories stitched into the cloth, symbols of birth, mourning, and courage, were traded for recognition, for applause, for revenge. Elders' warnings had not been heeded. "The cloth remembers," an elder whispered to herself as she watched from afar, "and it will speak again, louder than the loudest hall." The spirits that watched from the loom's shadow recoiled, disturbed by hands that were not meant to touch, by knowledge offered to those unprepared to respect it. Objects meant for protection trembled under careless hands. Ritual beads were shifted. Charms misplaced. Even the loom, heavy with years of silent wisdom, began to falter. Patterns refused to settle, threads tangled as if they had their own voice. Balance, once steady, now wavered. And no one noticed at first, for the village was caught between celebration and mourning. Some danced in the streets, lifting cups and shouting Amma's name. Others lowered their heads near shrines, hearts heavy with dread, mourning what was being broken in silence. Amid the roar of the city, Amma's own soul grew lonely. Crowds cheered her, cameras flashed, and the world bowed before her hands, yet no one reached across the distance to the small village where her journey began. Even the elders' quiet looks of caution could not pierce her attention. "I have come so far," she told herself at night, tracing a pattern she had long memorized. "I have earned this." But inside, something hollow echoed, a pulse reminding her that praise, when severed from roots, can sound louder than it should. And in that hollowness, the threads of the past began to stir, waiting for the moment when memory and destiny would demand their due. The loom sat before Amma like an old guardian, its wooden frame polished smooth by centuries of careful hands. But tonight, it trembled under her touch. Threads twisted and frayed despite her practiced fingers, patterns unraveling as if the spirits themselves had turned away. "No, this cannot be," Amma whispered, trying again, pulling each thread taut, coaxing the design into place. Yet the cloth resisted, stiff and unyielding, as though the ancestors were testing her patience, reminding her that power taken lightly cannot hold. The colors, once vibrant like sunrise over the savannah, faded as if mourning. Reds dulled to the hue of dry earth, blues turned ashen like storm clouds, and golds lost their shimmer. Amma held up a panel, the dyes bleeding together like memory wounded by neglect. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, "When the cloth weeps, the heart must listen." But Amma shook it off, placing the panel aside. "It is the dye," she muttered. "Poor batches, nothing more." Even the machines, polished and new, refused to obey. They clattered and jammed when the sacred symbols were loaded, screens flickering as if warning her. The mechanical rhythm that usually hummed smoothly now stuttered like a heart in fear. Engineers cursed the glitches, blaming software. Amma frowned. "It must be a technical issue," she said aloud, her voice tight. "I've worked too hard to let superstition slow me down." She cleared the jam, telling herself, logic must prevail where old beliefs cannot. And so she ignored the signs. Nights grew longer, her body weary, yet she pressed forward. "Stress," she said. "Sabotage, maybe, someone jealous of my work." She refused to speak of spirits, refused to consider the whispers of ancestors. Each ignored warning tightened the invisible threads around her, unseen but waiting. Then the law of the ancestors spoke, not in words, but in truth. The loom shivered once more, threads snapping, colors collapsing together like grief. Amma felt it then. Her gift was not hers alone. It was entrusted to her hands, yes, but only if wielded with humility, respect, and remembrance. Pride could not hold what had been given freely. Her breath caught. "I have been blind," she thought, "and the cloth has taught me at last." Across the village, across the shadows she thought were safe, envy stirred. The relative who had watched in silence felt the first embers of action ignite. "If she will not remember," a whisper hissed in the darkness, "then perhaps I must remind her." Hands that had once clapped in admiration now trembled with resentment. A line had been crossed. Thoughts could now become deeds, and deeds, once begun, cannot be taken back. Meanwhile, fate moved quietly, weaving threads unseen. The broken patterns, the bleeding colors, the faltering machines, all were pieces of a larger loom, aligning in ways human eyes could not yet see. Every misstep, every ignored warning, every act of envy was a stitch in the fabric of justice. The world held its breath, waiting. And though no drum sounded, though no fire burned, Amma's reckoning had begun, silent but inexorable, as patient and unstoppable as the river carving its path through stone. The night was meant to crown Amma forever. Lights stretched across the grand hall, reflecting off polished floors like stars that had fallen from the sky. Every seat was filled with expectant eyes, royalty draped in jewels, critics with pens poised, cameras flashing at every turn. The air buzzed with excitement, a river of applause waiting to pour. Amma stood behind her collection, chest rising with pride. "Tonight," she whispered to herself, "they will see what I have created." Her fingers hovered over the cloth, tracing the patterns she had dreamed of for years. This night was hers to be remembered. Yet beneath the glitter, a warning murmured in the shadows. The elders, silent, sat far from the cameras, their eyes heavy with concern. "You should have asked us first," one whispered to the wind. Amma, caught in the pull of celebration, did not hear them. The sacred ground beneath the hall had held generations of prayer, rituals that once protected every thread she wove. Now, that protection had been left behind, unacknowledged. The world gathered in awe. Reporters jostled for space, cameras focused on every detail. From distant kingdoms and distant continents, they had come to witness a woman who carried Africa on her shoulders. The music swelled. The lights dimmed and rose again. Every eye followed Amma as she revealed her creation, patterns that told of rivers, of harvests, of ancestors' whispers. "This is our heritage," Amma said aloud, her voice carrying both pride and triumph. But pride can blind, and the voices of warning were drowned. Somewhere in the crowd, a heart darkened. The relative who had once shared her earliest dreams clenched fists under a cloak of admiration now poisoned by resentment. Every cheer felt like a lash. Every smile Amma offered to the world, a reminder that attention had bypassed them. "All these years," the relative muttered, teeth grinding. "All this glory, and I remain unseen." The bitterness that had grown quietly for years now boiled. Tonight, it would act. Hands that had been trusted to preserve the sacred now moved with intent. The holy loom, carved with symbols older than memory, trembled as fingers touched it without reverence. Threads that once held blessings began to shift, loosen, and quiver. A bond forged across generations, between craft, spirit, and soul, quivered dangerously. The elders had warned, ungrateful hands cannot hold what was given freely. And then the mark appeared. The forbidden symbol, never meant to be drawn by mortal hands, awakened under the relative's deliberate touch. Its lines glowed faintly, unseen yet felt, a summoning no one could ignore. A whisper of power stirred in the air, cold and patient. Amma, blissful in the limelight, could not yet see what was coming. But the ancestors, always vigilant, had been roused. The night of glory was now threaded with a danger she could not yet measure, a reckoning quietly gathering its strength. The ritual had been broken in secret, in the quiet hours before the world even noticed. Hands that once worked alongside Amma's, trusted and familiar, moved with purpose guided by envy and wounded pride. Charms were shifted, beads scattered, and sacred symbols traced where they should never be touched. No one spoke aloud, but the air hummed with disturbance. The ancestors, ever watchful, felt the rupture, and the protection that had shielded Amma's gift began to falter. Amma walked onto the runway with her usual grace, head high, smiles ready. Cameras flashed like lightning over a calm sea. She believed the night was hers, that every eye was hers to captivate. She could not sense the silent shift beneath the floorboards, the unspoken force gathering in the threads. At first, it was subtle. Threads refused to lay flat. Patterns she had stitched 1,000 times rebelled, twisting and curling as if they had a will of their own. Amma frowned, fingers trembling. "What is this?" she muttered, tugging at the fabric, but the cloth resisted, stiffening in her hands, jerking as though alive. Then the tearing began. Fabric split down the seams as if screaming, threads wailing in tension. The cloth moved like a living thing, animated by the fury of unseen eyes. Amma's heart sank as she tried to calm it, whispering apologies to the loom, to the patterns, to the ancestors she had neglected. But the cloth did not listen. Colors bled. Red became dust, gold dull and gray, blues drained into lifeless ash. The brilliance of her work, the colors that once celebrated rivers, harvests, and ancestral blessings, was gone. Where pride had sought applause, mourning now ran visibly across the garments. Each panel seemed to weep, each stitch carrying shame and anger. The audience fell silent. Gasps were swallowed before they could escape. Journalists froze mid-pen stroke. Royals shifted in their chairs. Celebrities stopped posing. The world had gathered to witness greatness, and now greatness was collapsing, not in rumor or story, but in living motion before their eyes. Amma's pride, once radiant, hung fragile in the air, and the ancestors' quiet justice had spoken. The news traveled faster than Amma could blink. By morning, her name was on every tongue, across continents, across oceans. Headlines screamed betrayal of tradition, arrogance, and greed. "The Golden Weaver falls," they said. Tweets, stories, and whispers carried the image of torn cloth and bleeding colors, spreading a tale that would strip her legacy bare. Every corner of the fashion world that had once cheered her now stared in disbelief. Friends turned cautious. Partners hesitated. The world that had once lifted her above all now judged without mercy. Amma collapsed into the quiet of her dressing room, chest heaving, hands trembling. Pride, denial, and pain collided inside her. How did it happen?" she whispered, tears burning her eyes. Her body sat in stillness, but her soul tumbled, unmoored, drowning in shame and confusion. Memories of triumph now felt like mockery. Every stitch she had poured herself into, every pattern she had claimed as her own, now felt like a betrayal of the hands that had guided her. In the shadows of her grief, visions appeared. Her grandmother's face emerged, gentle yet firm. The first weavers, ancestors whose wisdom had been stitched into every fiber, stood silent but accusing. "Amma," her grandmother's voice rang clear, though her lips never moved. "You have forgotten the hands that lifted you. You have ignored the songs that taught your fingers to dance." Threads of light circled her, showing the lineage of craft, each life touched, each lesson imparted. The spirits demanded remembrance, their presence heavy yet radiant, insisting she see what she had overlooked. Pain became revelation. She understood now that ambition was not the sin. Her pride, her forgetfulness, her dismissal of gratitude and humility had broken the bond between her gift and its source. She had climbed too high without honor, sought applause without respect, and now the cost was clear. The lessons her grandmother and the ancestors had whispered for years had been ignored, and suffering was the teacher that would not be denied. Shame wrapped around her like a second skin, impossible to shed. Every headline, every whispered comment, every photo of ruined garments pressed upon her, reminding her that the world had seen her fail. She tried to hide, tried to explain, but humiliation had already claimed her, leaving nothing but truth in its place. Loss followed swiftly, stripping away fame, pride, and illusion. The accolades, the red carpets, the crowds, all vanished in the weight of what had been broken. In that void, nothing remained except clarity. She was alone, her legacy torn, and yet within that emptiness lay a seed of awakening. And then the awakening came. It rose quietly at first, a whisper in the darkness, a pulse in her chest. Amma felt her fingers itch with memory, her heart stir with understanding. The ancestors' voices, the loom's silent demand, and the lessons of those who came before guided her. From disgrace and pain, a new path opened, one forged in humility, remembrance, and respect. She breathed deeply, feeling the first spark of redemption, a rebirth from ashes, a soul ready to weave once more, but this time in harmony with the hands and hearts that had always walked beside her. Amma stepped away from the city lights, leaving behind the flashing cameras, the endless applause, and the hum of distant helicopters. Each step felt heavy, not with defeat, but with the weight of reflection. She did not defend herself, did not send statements to journalists, did not answer the endless calls. Instead, she let silence embrace her, a quiet companion that whispered truths she had ignored for too long. "I must go home," she murmured, voice trembling yet certain. The applause that once fed her now felt hollow, distant, and meaningless. The road back to her village stretched long, winding through hills and forests, across rivers where the morning mist hung low like ancestral spirits watching her return. Every familiar path awakened memories. Her first woven cloth, her grandmother's gentle hands guiding hers, the smells of earth and dye, the songs sung at sunrise. She whispered thanks to the land she had left behind, each step a prayer of humility, each breath a plea to remember who she truly was. When she arrived, she did not stride in as a star, nor demand admiration. She knelt before the elders, lowering her head as a child might before the council. Her hands rested on the worn mat, fingers brushing the faded threads that had once marked her first lessons. "I have failed," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "I seek your guidance. I seek forgiveness." Eyes that had seen generations of wisdom studied her, silent yet attentive, waiting for humility, for truth, for acknowledgement. The eldest rose slowly, robes rustling like the wind through ancestral trees. "Amma," she said, voice calm, carrying the weight of countless seasons, "greatness without humility falls. Pride may lift a hand to the sky, but only respect, honor, and remembrance hold it steady. You have seen what happens when the balance is broken. The path to restoration begins with understanding this truth." Amma bowed deeper, absorbing each word like water into dry soil. At last, the truth that had lingered in shadows emerged. The betrayal that had ruined her showcase, torn her reputation, and enraged the ancestors was revealed before the assembled community. Silence fell over the crowd as the story unfolded, not in whispers or secrets, but openly, without disguise or protection. The one who had acted out of envy could no longer hide, and the village saw both the pain caused and the lesson embedded within it. The elders chose justice without blood, without rage, without revenge. Accountability, they said, is the tool of the wise. Truth must be faced, responsibility accepted, and repair made for what was broken. Let shame teach, let reflection guide, let healing follow. The betrayer's eyes met Amma's, shame burning yet tempered by the clarity of moral obligation. No one cheered, no one mocked. Only understanding and balance settled over the circle like a cool evening breeze. The weight of envy now rested upon the betrayer's shoulders. They bowed before the elders, carrying not physical chains, but the burden of reflection and responsibility. Every task, every stitch, every ritual they now performed reminded them of what pride and greed could fracture. "May your hands learn again what your heart has ignored," the elders intoned, voices echoing over the courtyard. And in that moment, justice, measured, patient, and rooted in tradition, was done. Both Amma and the betrayer began to understand that restoration is earned through humility, truth, and respect for the ancestors who watch silently but never forget. Amma stood quietly outside the small courtyard where the village children practiced their first stitches. The bright city lights and the applause of 1,000 strangers felt like a distant memory, a hollow echo she no longer sought. "I will not chase fame," she whispered, pressing her palm to the worn wooden loom. "I will earn purpose again, slowly, with respect." She knew the world would wait. Patience was the teacher now, not the glittering stages of distant lands. She gathered the young apprentices, their small hands eager and trembling with curiosity. "Every thread tells a story," she said softly, lifting a piece of cloth embroidered with symbols of the ancestors. "This is not just fabric. It carries our memory, our mistakes, our courage. Listen to it. Feel it. Respect it." The children leaned closer, eyes wide, as Amma guided their fingers over patterns that had once been lost to haste and ambition. Each loop and knot became a lesson in patience, humility, and ancestral pride. Amma revisited old rituals she had once skipped. She lit the incense that carried the scent of her grandmother's hands and sang the songs that called the spirits of the weavers to witness her work. Symbols forgotten, colors misused in her pursuit of speed, were restored with care. "We do not rush greatness," she told them. "We honor it, stitch by stitch." The elders nodded quietly from the edges of the courtyard, their eyes reflecting both caution and hope. She began designing again, this time not for applause, contracts, or glossy magazine covers, but for meaning. Each garment told a story of balance between the past and the present, the sacred and the modern. "Let your work serve, not show," she instructed, guiding the children through the final touches. Threads intertwined in harmony, telling of unity, humility, and the bridge between tomorrow and the ancestors. When her latest creation was complete, it shimmered not with extravagance, but with intention. The pattern spoke of restored order, the colors humbly vibrant, the stitches deliberate and thoughtful. Amma held it up to the rising sun, feeling the warmth on her hands and seeing the loom beneath her, smooth and willing, threads no longer resisting. She smiled, a quiet, deep smile. The moral she had learned was now sewn into every fiber. Gifts from the ancestors must be treated with respect, or they vanish. The sun climbed higher, casting light over a loom that no longer fought, over cloth that no longer rebelled, and over a weaver who had finally found her balance. The village, the children, and the ancestors watched in harmony, as purpose had replaced fame, and peace had been gently rewoven into the heart of creation.